legacy is open, and it has some stories for you. Silence your surroundings. What you are about to hear is more than just a story, so let the fear find its home, and don't forget to subscribe. Story 1. The Smiling Man on Route 77.
My name is Ray, and I've been driving an 18-wheeler for close to 30 years. I've hauled freight through every state in the continental US, seen every sunrise from behind a pane of bug-splattered glass, and lived on a diet of black coffee and truck stop chili. You spend that much time on the blacktop, you learn that the road has its own rhythm, its own personality. And you learn that some stretches of it, well, some stretches are just plain wrong. You see things out here, especially at night. Sleep, deprivation, and the endless drone of the tires can make your mind play tricks. You see shadow people darting across the road, hear phantom whispers on a dead CB channel. Most of it is nothing. Your brain just filling in the blanks of the dark and the quiet. I've always been a skeptic. I believe in what I can touch, what I can haul, and the paycheck that hits my bank account every other Friday. I thought I'd seen it all. Then, last spring, on a lonely stretch of Interstate 77 through the mountains of West Virginia, I saw him. It was about 3 in the morning, that dead hour when the world feels like it's holding its breath. The road was empty. I hadn't seen another pair of headlights for at least an hour. I was deep in the mountains, a winding ribbon of asphalt cutting through a black ocean of trees. My rig was heavy, the engine a low growl that was the only sound for 100 miles. And then I saw him, illuminated in the sweep of my high beams. He was standing on the shoulder of the road, perfectly still. He was dressed in a dark, old-fashioned suit that looked out of place, something from the 40s or 50s. He wasn't hitchhiking, he wasn't broken down, he was just standing there, facing my truck. But it was his face that made the professional, skeptical part of my brain shut down, and the ancient, animal part start screaming. He was smiling. It wasn't a normal smile. It was impossibly wide, stretching his face into a grotesque parody of happiness. It was a predatory, hungry grin, full of what looked like far too many teeth. His eyes were wide, black, and they seemed to catch the light of my headlights and swallow it whole. A wave of cold, chemical dread washed over me. Every instinct I had screamed that what I was looking at was not a man. I didn't slow down. I kept my foot pressed firmly on the accelerator, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. I passed him in a roar of wind and diesel, my eyes locked on the road ahead. I didn't want to look in my mirrors. I didn't want to see if he was still there. I just drove. After a few minutes, my heart still hammering, I reached for my CB radio to warn anyone who might be behind me. "Hey, eastbound drivers on 77, I said, my voice hoarse. "Just a heads up, there's a real weird fella standing on the shoulder around mile marker 138. Just be advised." The only response was a wall of pure, crackling static. Not a single voice. On a major interstate, even at this hour, that was strange. The silence felt heavy, unnatural. It felt like the road was holding me in a bubble, cut off from the rest of the world. I drove for another 20 minutes. The image of that horrible smile burned into my mind. I was starting to rationalize, to tell myself it was a prank, a mannequin, anything but what it felt like. I was just passing mile marker 158, a full 20 miles from the first sighting, when my headlights picked out a figure ahead. It was him, standing on the shoulder in the exact same pose, wearing the same old-fashioned suit, and he was smiling that same wide, predatory grin. It was impossible. No one could move that fast. My blood turned to ice. This time, as I approached, he slowly raised one hand and gave me a little wave. His smile seemed to widen, stretching his face to an unnatural degree, the skin pulling tight at the corners of his mouth. This time, I didn't just drive past. I floored it. The engine roared in protest as I pushed the rig past 90, a dangerous speed for a full load on a mountain road. I had to get away. I had to put as much distance as I could between me and that thing. As I flew past him, I risked a glance in my passenger side mirror. The road behind me was dark. He was gone. A small, shaky breath of relief escaped my lips. I must be losing my mind. That's all it was. But then my mirror caught the reflection of my own taillights, casting a faint red glow on the asphalt far behind me. And for a split second, I saw him again. He was no longer on the shoulder. He was in the middle of the highway, his dark suit a void against the blacktop, and he was running. He was chasing my truck, keeping pace with it at over 90 miles an hour, his movements unnaturally fluid and smooth. His head was tilted at a broken angle, but his smile, that wide, tooth-filled smile, was fixed directly on me. I have never known a fear like that. It was a pure, primal terror that bypassed all rational thought. My foot was welded to the floor, the speedometer needle trembling past 100. The whole rig was shaking, a controlled high-speed demolition on wheels, but I didn't care. The only thing that mattered was the image in that mirror. For what felt like an eternity, he kept pace, not running like a man, but gliding over the asphalt, his legs a blur beneath his dark suit. His head remained tilted, that smile a fixed beacon of utter malice in the red glow of my taillights. He wasn't trying to catch me. I felt a horrifying certainty about that. He was pacing me. He was playing. Then, as suddenly as he had appeared, he was gone. One moment he was there, a terrifying specter in my mirror, and the next, there was only empty, dark road. I didn't slow down, not for another 50 miles. I ran that engine harder than it had ever been run, putting a lifetime of wear on it in a single hour, until I saw the blessed artificial glow of a 24-hour truck stop on the horizon. It looked like the gates of heaven. I pulled off the highway, the hiss of the air brakes the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I parked in a row of sleeping giants, cut the engine, and sat there in the sudden, ringing silence, my whole body trembling in the aftermath of the adrenaline. I didn't know how long I sat there, but when I finally looked at the clock, it was almost dawn. I stumbled into the diner, the smell of stale coffee and bacon a welcome anchor to reality. I must have looked like I'd seen a ghost. My hands were shaking so badly I had to use both of them to lift my coffee cup. An old-timer, a trucker with a face like a worn-out road map, was sitting a few booths down. He watched me for a minute before getting up and sliding into the seat opposite me. "See something bad out there on the blacktop, son?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. Normally, I would have brushed it off. "We don't talk about the weird stuff. It's bad luck." But I was so shaken, so desperate for it to be real and not a hallucination, that the words just spilled out of me. I told him everything. The man in the suit, the impossible speed, the smile. I expected him to laugh, to tell me to lay off the caffeine. He didn't laugh. His friendly demeanor vanished, replaced by a quiet, serious gravity. He looked down at his own coffee cup, swirling the contents. "Route 77, he said, more a statement than a question. West Virginia mountains, around mile marker 140 or so." I just nodded, my mouth suddenly dry. "You saw the smiling man," he said quietly. "Some call him the grinner. He's been out there a long, long time. He's a feature of the road, not a person on it." A bad patch of black ice in the shape of a man. He took a slow sip of his coffee. "There's stories about him going back decades. Things you only hear about on the CB late at night. What is he?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Nobody knows," the old-timer said, shaking his head. "Some say he's the ghost of a salesman who went mad and murdered his family in the 20s. Others say he's something older, a hunger that was in those mountains long before the road was ever paved. But the stories are all the same. He just appears, and he smiles." He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine. "And there are rules, son. You did the right thing by not stopping. You never stop, you never stare too long, and you never ever let him know you're scared. They say it draws him in. They say the fear is what he feeds on. The more you panic, the closer he gets, the faster he runs." I spent the whole day at that truck stop, drinking coffee, trying to steady my nerves, but the old-timer's words echoed in my head. My delivery was in Charlotte, and my return route was already scheduled. I had a load of medical supplies to pick up and haul back to Columbus. The route was non-negotiable. I had to go back the way I came. I had to drive right back through his territory. As dusk began to settle, a cold dread coiled in my stomach. The thought of getting back in that cab, of facing that darkness again, was a physical weight, but I had a job to do. I filled up my thermos, climbed back into my rig, and merged back onto the highway, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. The drive back was tense. Every shadow on the side of the road looked like a man in a suit. Every reflection looked like a smile. As I entered the mountain pass, the same stretch of road from the night before, a thick, unnatural fog rolled in, swallowing the world in a blanket of gray. My visibility dropped to less than 50 feet. I gripped the wheel, my eyes straining, peering into the swirling mist, and then I saw them. The blinking, rhythmic pulse of hazard lights up ahead. A car was pulled over on the shoulder. As I got closer, a figure emerged from the fog, waving its arms frantically. It was a woman. My whole body tensed. My foot instinctively moved towards the brake. This was different. This was a person, someone in real trouble. The old-timer's warning screamed in my mind, but my conscience screamed louder. I had to help. I slowed the rig down, its headlights cutting through the oppressive fog. The woman was clearer now, her face a mask of desperation. I could see the car behind her, a small sedan with its hood up. I was about to pull over when my headlights illuminated the space right behind her. Standing just inside the shroud of fog, barely visible, was him. The smiling man. He was standing perfectly still, his hand resting gently on the woman's shoulder, and his grin, wider and more terrible than I remembered, was fixed directly on my approaching truck. The woman wasn't waving for help, she was waving me in. It was a trap. Waving me in. It was a trap. For a second that stretched into a cold eternity, I was frozen. My mind screamed at me to stop, to help her, but the old-timer's words were a frantic alarm bell in my head. You never stop. You never let it know you're scared. The woman's desperate waving became more frantic, her eyes pleading with me. But behind her, that fixed, predatory smile was the true message. It was a hook, and she was the bait. I made my choice. I slammed my foot on the accelerator, not the brake. The engine roared and I blasted the air horn, a deafening, continuous scream of sound that ripped through the fog. I kept the rig aimed directly down the center line, a charging 18-wheeled beast of defiance. As I blew past them, I saw the woman's face change. The desperation in her eyes curdled into pure, absolute terror as she realized I wasn't stopping. She opened her mouth in a silent scream. The smiling man didn't move a muscle. He just watched me go, his grin seeming to cut even wider into his face. The moment I passed them, the trap was sprung. But it wasn't for the truck, it was for my sanity. The fog became a prison, and he was the warden. I saw him everywhere, a flicker of movement in the trees to my right, a dark suit darting between the ancient oaks, keeping pace with me. I'd glance at my left mirror and see his smiling face reflected for a split second instead of my own. The CB radio, which had been dead for hours, crackled to life. It wasn't a voice, it was a sound. A slow rhythmic scraping, like a shovel being dragged across asphalt. It was the sound of something being patiently followed, of a grave being prepared. The gauntlet grew worse. As I approached an overpass, I saw a figure standing on it, looking down. The same suit, the same smile. As my cab passed directly beneath him, I heard a tremendous thud from the roof of my trailer, a sound of heavy, compact weight that made the entire rig shudder. He was on me. I could hear a faint dragging sound from up there as I drove, the sound of him moving across the top of my trailer, coming towards the cab. I was no longer just scared. I was in a state of primal animalistic panic. I swerved the truck violently, trying to shake him off, the trailer groaning and fishtailing behind me on the wet road. It was reckless, but I didn't care. And then, he was gone from the roof and back in front of me. He simply appeared in my headlights, not 100 feet ahead, standing directly in the middle of my lane. There was no time to stop. My only options were to hit him or to wreck. I wrenched the wheel to the left with all my strength. The tires screamed. The massive weight of the trailer fought against the turn, the whole rig groaning as it jackknifed. I saw the world spin in a blur of fog and red taillights. I was looking at my own trailer as it tried to overtake my cab. I was going to die. I closed my eyes, bracing for the impact, the sound of tearing metal, but it never came. With a final violent shudder, the truck straightened out. I was still on the road, still moving. I was shaking uncontrollably, covered in a cold sweat, but I was alive. I looked in my mirror. The road behind me was completely empty. The fog was beginning to thin. Ahead, I could see the first faint glow of dawn on the horizon. I had made it through. I had survived. I drove for another hour, leaving the mountains and their hungry shadows behind me until I saw the bright, welcoming lights of a large service plaza. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. I pulled the rig into the parking lot, the hiss of the air brakes like a final sigh of relief. It was over. I sat in my cab for a long time, just breathing, watching the sun come up. When my hands finally stopped shaking enough to work, I climbed down from the cab. The morning air was cool and clean. I was alive. I needed coffee. I walked towards the glass doors of the service station. I was tired, aching, and probably looked like I'd aged 20 years in one night. As I approached the entrance, I saw my own reflection walking towards me in the clean, polished glass. I looked pale, haggard, my eyes wide and haunted, and I was smiling. I stopped dead. My heart seized in my chest. In the reflection, the man walking towards me, the man who was my perfect double, was grinning from ear to ear. It wasn't my smile. It was his. An impossibly wide, predatory, tooth-filled grin that stretched my own face into a mask of utter madness. I slowly raised my hand and touched my own face. My skin was cold. My mouth was set in a grim, terrified line. I was not smiling, but in the glass, the man with my face was. He was ecstatic. The old-timer was wrong. The fear wasn't what he fed on. It was what he followed. He didn't want to make me crash. He just wanted a ride. As I stood there, paralyzed in the bright morning sun, I felt it. A faint alien twitch in the muscles of my own face. The corners of my mouth pulling upwards just a little. A smile that wasn't mine, fighting to be born. Wasn't mine, fighting to be born.
Story 2. The Cargo That Whispers.
My name is Sam, and unlike most of the old-timers you'll meet at truck stops, I don't have 30 years of stories under my belt. I've only been driving for about 4 years, and most of that time has been spent just trying to stay afloat. I bought my rig used, and it bleeds me dry. Constant repairs, bad fuel economy, the works. So when a call came in for an off-the-books job that paid cash, enough cash to solve all my problems in one go, I didn't ask as many questions as I should have. The job came through a dispatcher I'd never heard of, a gravelly voice on the phone who called himself Mr. Jones. The instructions were simple and direct. I was to drive to a defunct warehouse complex outside of Gary, Indiana. I was to back my rig up to loading dock 3 at exactly 2 a.m. I was to hook up to a sealed, preloaded container, and I was to drive it to a specified address in rural Nevada. He gave me 2 rules, 2 very strict rules. First, no unauthorized stops. Fuel and 15-minute food breaks, only at designated locations he would text me. Second, and he repeated this one twice, I was never, under any circumstances, to attempt to open the container or even inspect the seal. You're a delivery driver, Sam. His voice crackled over the phone. That's all you need to be. Just get the box from A to B. The money was too good to refuse. That night, I drove to the address he'd given me. The warehouse complex was a corpse of rusting metal and shattered windows, a place that industry had long since abandoned. Loading dock 3 was the only one that had power, a single flickering halogen lamp casting a sickly yellow glow on the concrete. The container was already there, a huge, white, 40-foot refrigerated unit. It wasn't just refrigerated, it was practically Arctic. A thick layer of frost coated the entire box, and a plume of freezing mist vented from the humming generator unit on the front. A single man in a dark coat was waiting for me. He didn't say a word, just pointed at the container. I backed my rig up, the hiss of the air brakes echoing in the dead silence. The hookup was routine, but as I connected the power lines for the reefer unit, I felt the intense, unnatural cold radiating from it. It was colder than any freezer unit I'd ever hauled. The man handed me a heavy briefcase full of cash and a cheap burner phone. The drop-off address will be sent when you are 1 hour out, he said. Do not lose this phone, and do not be late. The first day was the easiest money I ever made. I drove west, through Illinois, across the Mississippi, into the flat plains of Iowa and Nebraska. The sun was out, the truck was running fine for once, and the thought of the cash in my passenger seat was a warm, comforting feeling. I stopped for fuel at the truck stop. Jones texted me, a bustling place full of other drivers. Everything felt normal. It was on the second night, deep in the Wyoming Badlands, that things started to feel wrong. The road was a long, dark spear into nothingness. The loneliness of the high plains began to press in on me. I had stopped for a quick coffee and a bathroom break at a tiny, desolate gas station, another one of the designated spots. As I was walking back to my cab, I heard it, a soft, muffled thump from inside the trailer. I stopped, my hand on the door handle. It sounded exactly like a heavy object tipping over. The load must have shifted, I told myself. It happens. I tried to ignore the cold knot that was tightening in my stomach. An hour later, I heard it again, but this time it wasn't a thump. It was a scratch, a faint, rhythmic scrape from deep inside the container. My blood ran cold. That wasn't the sound of cargo shifting. I pulled the rig over onto the dark shoulder, the silence of the planes rushing in as I killed the engine. I grabbed a flashlight and walked back to the trailer. The reefer unit was humming loudly, blasting out a wave of frigid air. The entire back door of the container was coated in a thick, feathery layer of ice. I put my hand on the large, steel locking bars. They were so cold it was like touching dry ice, a searing, painful cold that went right to the bone. The seal was a heavy-duty, numbered metal tag, and it was perfectly intact. No one had opened this door. As I stood there, my hand on the frozen lock, every rational part of my brain screaming that this was crazy, I heard another sound. It was not a thump. It was not a scratch. It was a voice dot. It was a perfectly clear, human whisper, and it came from directly on the other side of the solid steel door. It whispered my name. Sam whispered my name. I scrambled back from the door like it was white-hot, my feet stumbling in the loose gravel of the shoulder. My flashlight fell from my trembling hand, its beam cutting a frantic, bouncing path across the asphalt. I stood there in the oppressive silence of the Wyoming night, my breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. My mind was a civil war of denial and terror. It was the wind. It was the hum of the reefer unit playing tricks on my ears. It was a stowaway, a migrant who had somehow gotten inside before the container was sealed. But none of those explanations fit. The seal was solid, the cold was absolute, and the whisper, it hadn't just been a sound. I had felt it, a faint vibration against the steel door, a word meant only for me. I didn't do any more checks. I got back in my cab, locked the doors, and drove. I drove with the desperate urgency of a prey animal, pushing the rig through the darkness, my eyes constantly darting to the mirrors, half expecting to see the trailer doors swinging open behind me. The whispers started again an hour later. At first, it was just my name, Sam, repeated at odd intervals, but then other voices joined in, a woman crying softly, an old man muttering numbers, a child humming a disjointed nursery rhyme. It was a faint, ghostly chorus, a crowd of voices all speaking at once from inside the freezing container behind me. They weren't loud, but they were constant, a layer of sound just beneath the drone of my engine. I turned the radio up, blasting music until my ears hurt, but I could still feel their murmuring, a vibration in the floor of the cab, just as the sun was beginning to bleed over the horizon, casting long skeletal shadows across the Utah salt flats. The burner phone rang. The sound, a harsh, digital shriek, made me jump so violently I almost swerved off the road. I fumbled for it, my heart pounding. It was Mr. Jones. Status report, his gravelly voice said, without any preamble. Everything's fine. I lied, my own voice sounding thin and weak. On schedule, just crossing into Utah. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Is that so? He said, his tone flat and unconvinced. And the cargo, is it quiet? A cold dread washed over me. He knew. It's a sealed container, sir, I stammered. I can't hear anything. Another pause. I could hear him breathing, a slow, steady sound. Let me give you some advice, Sam, he said, his voice dropping lower, more serious. You're not just hauling a box. You're a shepherd. Your only job is to keep the flock moving toward the pen. Don't give them a reason to get agitated. Just keep driving. The line went dead. A shepherd, a flock. The words sent a fresh wave of terror through me. Whatever I was hauling, it was alive. As I drove deeper into the Nevada desert, the sun climbing high in the sky. The truck began to change. The reefer unit, which had been humming steadily, now roared like a jet engine, working constantly to maintain the impossible cold inside. The plumes of freezing mist became a thick, billowing fog that trailed behind my truck. The layer of frost on the container grew into a thick shell of crystalline ice, inches deep, a bizarre, Arctic spectacle crawling through the shimmering desert heat. The world around the truck seemed to react to it. I saw a coyote on the side of the road, watching me approach, and as my trailer passed it, the animal just seized up and fell over, as if a swarm of locusts that flew into my path didn't splatter on the windshield. They just dropped from the air like a rain of dead leaves. The cargo was projecting an aura of death, a circle of cold that was poisoning the world around it. It was a rolling tomb. The way station appeared out of the heat haze like a mirage. Mandatory inspection. There was no avoiding it. I pulled the rig onto the scales, my stomach a knot of pure dread. A burly state trooper walked a slow circle round my truck. His eyes narrowed. "Son, what in the hell is going on with your trailer?" he asked, his hand resting on his hip. "It's 110 degrees out here, and your box is a damn iceberg. Your reefer is screaming. What are you hauling?" "Medical supplies," I lied, my mouth dry. "Highly perishable." He wasn't buying it. He tapped on the thick ice near the back door. "I've never seen anything like this. Let me see your manifest and bill of lading." "It's a rush job," I said, my mind racing. "The dispatcher has the paperwork. He's supposed to be faxing it over to the station." The trooper's eyes hardened. He knew I was lying. "I'm gonna need you to open up. Son, we need to inspect the cargo." "I can't," I said, my voice shaking. "The seal is coded. Only the receivers can open it." "That's not how this works," he said, stepping closer to the back doors, trying to read the license plate through the ice. "You're in violation of..." He stopped talking. His face went pale. He had gotten within a few feet of the doors. I knew what he was hearing. From inside my cab, I could hear it too. The whispers had stopped. They had been replaced by a single, deafening, overlapping wave of sound. 1,000 voices all screaming at once from inside the container. The trooper put his hands to his head, his eyes rolling back. "So many," he gasped, stumbling backward. "Make them stop. Make them stop talking." He let out a choked, terrified scream and collapsed onto the hot asphalt, his body convulsing. The way station erupted in chaos. Other officers were running towards him, shouting into their radios. And in that moment, I knew what the shepherd had to do. I slammed the truck into gear and floored it. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I left a scene of chaos behind me. The flashing lights of the way station swallowed by the desert night. I was a fugitive now, a ghost on the highway. My only purpose to get this cursed cargo to its destination. The truck felt less like a vehicle and more like a tomb I was chained to, dragging it across the country. The voices in the trailer changed after that. The chaotic, overlapping whispers coalesced into distinct, individual pleas. It was a far worse torture. I heard a little girl crying for her mother. I heard a young man begging to be let out, saying he was a college student from Phoenix and he didn't know how he got here. I heard an old woman humming a hymn, her voice trembling with cold. They spoke to me. They called me by name. They told me about their lives, their families, their last memories before waking up in the cold and the dark. It was a constant, heartbreaking assault of lost souls. 100 different lives screaming for release inside the frozen box behind my head. And beneath there, please. A new sound began to form, a voice that was not human. It was a deep, cold, resonant hum, like the sound of a massive freezer or the wind in a deep cave. It rarely formed words, but when it did, they were simple, ancient, and full of a chilling hunger. So cold, it would drone, its voice vibrating through the floor of the cab. So quiet. Need more. More voices. More warmth. It was the jailer, and I was delivering more prisoners to its pantry. The burner phone chimed one last time. A set of coordinates. A desolate mining road, deep in the mountains of Colorado. The end of the line. I followed the route for hours, leaving the main highway, climbing up winding, unpaved roads. The destination was a defunct iron mine, its entrance a gaping, dark wound in the side of a mountain. 2 black, unmarked trucks were waiting, along with the same grim-faced men from the warehouse in Indiana. They moved with the same cold efficiency. They didn't ask about the way station, about why I was hours behind schedule. They didn't care. Their only focus was the cargo. As I unhooked the trailer, my hands numb from the cold and the fear. One of them handed me a second briefcase. "Your final payment," the stone-faced man said. "Now leave. Forget this route. Forget this cargo. Forget our faces." But I couldn't leave. Not yet. I had to know. I had dragged this piece of rolling damnation across the country. I had earned the right to see what was inside. I hid behind a pile of old mining equipment, watching as they backed the container up to the mine's entrance. They didn't unlock the doors. They attached a series of heavy cables to a winch and pulled the entire back panel of the container off with a groan of protesting metal. A wave of intense, visible cold, thick as fog, poured out of the opening. And I finally saw my cargo. It wasn't a body. It wasn't a monster. It was a machine, a bizarre, impossible device that filled the entire container. It was a complex lattice of some black, crystalline material that seemed to absorb the light, all of it covered in feathery frost and interwoven with thick, humming cables. In the center, a sphere of pure darkness pulsed with a slow, rhythmic light, like a black heart beating. The chorus of whispers was pouring out of it, a fountain of invisible, psychic agony. I overheard one of the men speaking into a radio. "The echo chamber is secure. We are moving it into the primary containment vault." The collection was successful. An echo chamber, a collection. They weren't transporting a thing. They were transporting people, or what was left of them. Their voices, their memories, their souls. A prison of consciousness, trapped in a cold, dark machine. I had been their chariot. I didn't need to see anymore. I scrambled back to my rig, threw the second briefcase onto the passenger seat, and drove. I drove away from that mountain as fast as I could, relief washing over me in a tidal wave, so powerful it almost made me sick. The silence in my cab was the most beautiful thing I had ever heard. It was over. I was free. I was rich. I drove until the sun came up, putting hundreds of miles between me and that mine. I finally allowed myself to relax. I turned on my regular radio, desperate to fill the silence with something normal, something human. A classic rock song came on, and I cranked the volume, singing along, feeling alive for the first time in days. And then I heard it. Underneath the music, faint but clear. "It's so cold," a little girl whispered, her voice seeming to come from the seat right beside me. I slammed the radio off. The cab was silent again, but only for a second. "Where are we going?" an old man muttered from the back of the sleeper cab. "I want my mum," another voice cried. My blood turned to ice. They weren't in the container anymore. They weren't back at the mine. The prison walls had not been perfect. Some of the echoes, some of the souls I had chauffeured across the country, had clung to me. They had escaped. And my truck, my home, my lonely sanctuary on the road, had just become their new jail. Just become their new jail.
Story 3. The town that smelled of rain.
My name is Dale, and I live by the map. Always have. In my 20 years of driving long haul, I've trusted my atlas and my GPS like they were gospel. They're the rule book. They tell you where the world is and where it isn't. I've learned that any road that isn't on the map is a road you don't take. Period. I'd never broken that rule until a Tuesday in May, in the middle of a thunderstorm that was trying to tear the sky apart over western Kansas. I was already 6 hours behind schedule, pushing my rig through a wall of water that turned the highway into a black river. My dispatcher was breathing down my neck about a time-sensitive delivery. Then the message came over the digital traffic alert. A flash flood had taken out the bridge on I-70. The official detour would add another 4 hours to my trip, an eternity I didn't have. But my GPS, bless its silicon heart, offered me a shortcut, a series of old state highways and county roads that would bypass the closure and, in theory, save me 2 hours. Against my better judgment, I took it. The moment I left the interstate, the world changed. The road narrowed, the asphalt cracked and worn. The rain, if it was possible, fell even harder. I was in the absolute middle of nowhere, surrounded by endless, flat fields that were invisible in the deluge. For an hour, I followed the calm, digital voice of the GPS, turning down one forgotten road after another. My cell signal had died a long time ago. It was just me, the roar of the rain, and the humming glow of the screen. Then my truck died. There was no warning. The engine didn't sputter. It just stopped. The lights flickered and went out. The GPS screen went black. The engine's roar was replaced by a deafening silence, filled only by the drumming of rain on the roof of my cab. I tried the ignition, nothing. I tried the radio, dead. I was stranded, a steel box of useless metal in a biblical flood, on a road that probably hadn't seen another vehicle in a decade. I was screwed. I sat there for what felt like an hour, hoping the storm would pass, but it only seemed to intensify. That's when I saw the light dot. It was faint, a warm, blurry glow through the sheets of rain, maybe a mile or two down the road, a town. It wasn't on my GPS, I was sure of it, but a light meant people, a phone, a mechanic. Hoped with no other choice, I pulled on my jacket, stepped out into the storm, and started walking. The walk was brutal. The wind and rain were relentless, but as I got closer, the light resolved itself into the streetlights of a small town. A rusty, wrought iron sign arched over the road. In faded, peeling letters, it read, "Welcome to Precipice, Hop 121. The town itself was unnervingly quiet. It was the strangest thing. Every light in every house was on, casting a welcoming glow, but there were no cars moving, no people on the street, not even a dog barking. The architecture was ancient, perfectly preserved from the 1950s. There was a town square with a bandstand, a barber shop with a striped pole, a single gas station. Everything was immaculately clean, as if the rain was constantly washing it. And the smell, it was overwhelming. Not a bad smell, but a strange one. The smell of rain hitting dry earth, that fresh, ozonic petrichor scent. But it was so strong it was almost cloying, a perfume that saturated everything. I saw a neon sign flickering in the window of a diner on the main street. Open, it buzzed. It was my only option. I pushed the door open, a small bell tinkling above me. The diner was warm and dry. A few patrons, a handful of men in old-fashioned work clothes, sat at the counter, nursing coffee cups. A waitress in a faded blue uniform stood behind the counter, wiping it with a cloth. They all turned to look at me as I entered, water dripping from my coat onto the clean checkered floor. They didn't seem surprised to see a stranger bursting from a hurricane. They just watched me with a kind of placid, weary curiosity. Every single one of them was pale, their skin almost luminous in the diner's warm light. And their clothes, I noticed, all looked subtly damp, as if they'd just come in from the rain themselves. The waitress gave me a sad, gentle smile, one that didn't quite reach her tired eyes. "We've been expecting you," she said, her voice soft and melodic. "You must be thirsty." She slid a heavy glass of water across the counter towards me. I looked down at it. The water wasn't clear. It was cloudy, filled with a fine, gray silt, and it smelled of wet dirt and ozone, like the first moments of a summer storm. I stared at the cloudy water, my thirst suddenly gone, replaced by a cold, prickling unease. A dozen rational explanations tried to surface in my mind. A broken water filter, sediment from an old well, but none of them could explain the waitress's words. "We've been expecting you, my truck," I said, my voice hoarse. It broke down a mile or two back. The engine, the electronics, everything just cut out. The men at the counter nodded slowly, in unison, as if this was the most normal thing in the world. "Happens," one of them said, his voice a quiet rumble. "The storm plays tricks on the engines. Our mechanic, Mr. Hemlock, will take a look in the morning." The waitress offered, her sad smile never wavering. "He can fix anything. For now, you should get a room at the motel. Get out of those wet things. The rain is supposed to last all night." She said it with a strange finality, as if the rain had been lasting all night for 1,000 years. The motel was just across the street, its neon sign humming a lonely tune. The room was just like the diner, impossibly clean, perfectly preserved from the 1950s, and everything I touched, from the Channel bedspread to the lampshade, felt faintly, inexplicably damp. The only sound was the constant, gentle drumming of rain on the roof and the window pane. I tried the phone on the nightstand, but the line was dead. The television only showed a swirling sea of black and white static. I couldn't sleep. The feeling of being watched, of being in a place that operated on a set of rules I didn't understand, was too strong. I walked the main street of Precipice under the pale glow of the streetlights. The rain never faltered, a constant, cleansing curtain of water. I saw no one else, but I felt 1,000 eyes on me from the dark windows of the houses. I noticed two things that made the hair on my arms stand up. First, there were no children. No toys in any of the yards, no tricycles on the porches, no drawings taped to any windows. It was a town of adults, frozen in time. Second, every clock I could see was stopped at the exact same time. The large clock on the town hall, the one in the window of the barber shop, even my own wristwatch, which had stopped working, were all frozen. The hands were fixed at 3:17. My need for answers became a desperate, gnawing hunger. I found the town hall. The door was unlocked. Inside, a small, dusty room served as the town's library and public records office. It smelled of old paper and wet wool. I started pulling out old, leather-bound newspaper archives from the shelves, my hands shaking. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I knew the answer to this place was in its past. I found it in a copy of the Kansas State Chronicle, dated May 12, 1958. The headline was stark and brutal, covering the entire front page. Coulter Dam collapses. Entire town of Precipice washed away in catastrophic flash flood. My heart stopped. I read the article, my blood turning to ice water in my veins. It described a night just like this one. A historic thunderstorm that had overwhelmed a nearby earthen dam. At 3:17 a.m., the dam had failed. A 50-foot wall of water and mud had descended upon the sleeping town of Precipice, wiping it from the face of the earth in a matter of minutes. There were no survivors. The article listed all 121 residents who had perished that night. I scanned the names, a wave of nausea washing over me as I recognized them. The waitress, Abigail, the men from the diner, and the town mechanic, Theron Hemlock. I was in a graveyard, a ghost town populated by a collective, repeating memory of its last, terrifying moments on Earth. Panic, pure and absolute, seized me. I threw the book down and ran from the town hall, out into the relentless, accusing rain. I didn't know where I was running, only that I had to get to my truck. I had to get out. I found the mechanic's garage at the end of town. The bay door was open, and my rig was parked inside. And standing next to it, holding a heavy wrench, was a pale, elderly man in greasy overalls, Mr. Hemlock. He looked up as I ran in, his expression not of surprise, but of deep, profound sorrow. "Can't fix her, son," he said, his voice a weary sigh. "Did my best, but she won't be going anywhere. What's wrong with it?" I demanded, my voice cracking with desperation. He looked down at the wrench in his hands, then back at me. "Engine's full of mud," he said sadly. "Same as the rest of us." Confused, I looked down at my own feet. When I had entered the garage, my boots had been wet with rain, but now they were caked in inches of thick, dark, riverbed mud. The cuffs of my jeans were soaked through with it, a heavy, clinging weight that was trying to pull me down, to root me to the spot. The town wasn't just a memory. It was hungry, and it was claiming me, and it was claiming me. A cold, wet terror, thick as the mud on my boots, began to climb up my legs. I backed away from the old mechanic, my heart hammering a frantic, useless rhythm against my ribs. "What are you talking about?" I stammered, but I already knew. The cloudy water, the stopped clocks, the sad, knowing smiles. "You're one of us now," Mr. Hemlock said, his voice full of a sorrow that spanned decades. "The storm brought you. The road brought you. You were thirsty, and you drank the water. Now, you're rooted." I turned and ran. I burst out of the garage and back onto the main street. The rain was still falling, a constant, whispering curtain, but the town was no longer empty. They were all there. They were emerging from their houses, from the barber shop, from the movie theater. The waitress Abigail, the men from the diner, dozens of pale figures stepping out into the street, their movements slow and deliberate. They weren't running or screaming. They were just turning to face me, a silent, welcoming committee of the damned. Their faces all held the same expression of profound, endless loneliness and a faint, tragic hope. They were a congregation, and I was their long-awaited sermon. "Stay with us, Dale," Abigail's voice echoed, seeming to come from all around me at once, carried on the rain. "It's so quiet here. We need new stories." Their words were a hook, but the sight of the mud caking my own legs was the chain. I ignored them and ran, my boots sucking at the wet asphalt. I ran back down the road I had come from, away from the pale streetlights and into the oppressive darkness. The pursuit was not a chase, it was a tide. I could hear their slow, shuffling footsteps behind me, 100 pairs of feet, never getting closer, but never falling behind. They were an escort, seeing me to the edge of their world, confident I would not be able to leave. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs were screaming. The smell of rain and wet earth was so strong it was all I could taste. I could feel the town behind me, not just the people, but the place itself, its collective memory, its immense loneliness, trying to pull me back, trying to dissolve me into its endless, repeating tragedy. I risked a glance over my shoulder. They were still there, a silent, pale army marching through the rain, their forms growing faint in the distance. I stumbled, my foot catching on a pothole, and fell hard onto the wet road. I landed in a deep puddle, the muddy water splashing over me. As I pushed myself up, gasping, something felt different. The sound of the rain had stopped. I looked up. The sky was a pale, pre-dawn gray. The storm was gone. I was lying on an old, cracked asphalt road, overgrown with weeds. I turned to look back at the town of Precipice. It was gone. There was no main street, no diner, no houses with their lights on. Where the town should have been, there was only an overgrown field and the skeletal, collapsed ruins of a single, ancient farmhouse. The road I was on didn't lead anywhere. It just ended a few 100 feet ahead at a rusted, broken fence. In the far distance, I could see the familiar, steady lights of traffic on the main interstate. I was back. I was picked up a few hours later by a state trooper who found me wandering by the highway, caked in mud and rambling about a town that didn't exist. The official story became exhaustion, exposure, a brief hallucination brought on by the stress of the storm. I let them believe it. It was easier. I never drove a truck again. I moved to a city, as far from those empty Kansas plains as I could get. I tried to forget, but the town left its mark. I developed a crippling fear of water, a deep-seated hydrophobia. The sound of rain on a window pane feels like a prison sentence. I thought that was the worst of it. I was wrong. The real horror came months later, on a bright, sunny afternoon. I was in a crowded diner, hundreds of miles away from Kansas, trying to feel normal. I ordered a coffee. The waitress, a cheerful young woman, brought it to my table with a glass of ice water. As she set the glass down, I smelled it. It wasn't the smell of city water. It was the smell of ozone, of thunderstorms, of rich, wet earth. The smell of Precipice. My head snapped up. I looked at the waitress. She was smiling at me, but it wasn't a cheerful smile. It was sad. It was weary. It was the exact same knowing smile Abigail had given me that first night. And her hair, I noticed, looked slightly, inexplicably damp. A cold dread crept through my veins. I looked around the diner. The businessman on his laptop, the family laughing in a booth, the cook behind the counter. They were all looking at me. Their faces were all pale. Their clothes were all subtly damp. And their eyes, all of them, were filled with a familiar, deep, and terrible loneliness. I had escaped the town, but I had brought the rain with me. I had brought the rain with me.